Joining me now is Independent General Election candidate for Lincoln, Iain Burdon. Welcome, Iain. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
So we'll begin with a brief introduction for our audiences, as this interview will be slightly different from the other formats and discussions in the programme of interviews so far. Iain, who joins us now, is registered deaf and uses British Sign Language. Therefore, he's come along today with an interpreter, whose voice it is you'll be hearing on the side of the camera as he responds to our questions today. So thank you again for joining us and for taking part. Iain, why don't you start by giving us a brief description about yourself and your background?
Okay. I was born profoundly deaf, brought up profoundly deaf. I've been to different schools, boarding school from 3.5. My family were involved in the military, so we moved about a great deal. And that's why I tended to stay in the boarding school while the family moved about. Because as my family moved, I got really involved in travel and going abroad. And as an adult, I'm quite interested in other cultures and travelling and seeing how people live and how their disability can affect their lives. And in part, I want to become an MP to improve people's lives, both disabled and non-disabled. I've worked in a bank. I've worked at the moment for Lincoln County Council. I've been a union rep, so I've been quite involved in politics. I was involved in the creation of the Disability Discrimination Act through the union, and obviously getting information from the grassroots, ordinary disabled people, how the law affects them, protects them, or discriminates for them, and actually passing that information on to the powers that be. Now I'm in a different union. I'm in the National Committee for disability members, disabled members, and in the same way getting information from grassroots members about their housing, social context, how government policy affects all of us in our everyday lives, and then passing that on in how laws and legislation can be changed to make a positive difference within people's lives. So I love to travel, I love to fly, I like meeting people, and just learning about their views, their different life experiences, really. It might be personal, it might be political, it might be professional.
And so talk to me about your political views, your political leanings, and how you sort of got into politics.
Okay. I remember when I was small with my grandparents, they didn't sign, but they used gesture. And my granddad always said, you must vote, it's really important, you have to vote and put this cross. And I didn't really understand what he meant. And he took me to a polling station and said, you go in a box and you put a cross. And I'm like, oh. And he said, you've got to vote red. And I'm like, why? And he said, oh, football, because it's the same as our team. And I didn't really understand until I was much older that that's linked to politics and how the red and the blue and green and stuff is linked to different parties. So, for me it's always red, I guess. But I didn't understand the different political debates and the nuances between the different parties and the different views. And then I became interested in why do people vote for this particular party or that particular party, and it made me quite interested. And I thought, it's quite hard for me to follow. So, how government policies affect everyday people, and that needs to go back to government, which is why I got involved in the union. And they invited me to go to London, and they said, I'm kind of like, why do you want me to go? And they said, well, because you talk to people and we want to know what they say. So that's what I did. I collated all this information. And we got some achievement and some changes made, and that's where my interest in politics came from. And I think for a lot of deaf people, they don't understand politics, and for a lot of hearing people, they don't understand politics, what's really going on. And I think a lot of people have a feeling that there's hidden information, they don't know what's going on. You see stuff in the paper, but is that really what's going on? And also for deaf people, that translation of the stuff that's in the paper. And again, it's that sort of advocacy for people that understand, to help them understand what legislation means, how it supports them or doesn't support them. So it's kind of like you vote for them, they win, this is the legislation they're going to bring in, this is how it might affect you. And I really enjoy that.
So tell us about some of the things that you have already achieved through your campaigning and your work through disability groups and committees.
In the union, obviously we've got the Disability Discrimination Act, and that became law. I was involved in that. That was one huge achievement for disabled people. There's lots of little achievements, but that's the big one that stands out for me. Within the community in Lincoln, encouraging disabled people to get access. As I say before, I used to work in the bank. A lot of it is about access. And I was awarded a medal for that because they recognised that I'd achieved that. It's helping the community. It's not just deaf people and it's not just disabled people, it's all people need access. And then during my work through the council, you know, I've seen disabled staff working through the council suffering through bad treatment. So I set up a new group and that's been running for 10 years. I've chaired that for 10 years. And actually getting that message through to managers, we've got the Equality Act, you need to translate that into action, into things that happen to create that equality and how people progress through the scales and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm carrying on with that work. But I know before I went, a lot of disabled people were actually resigning because of the stress and the anxiety it was caused. You know, so now people are retaining their employment, which is obviously better. And the same with redundancies to make sure redundancy selection is fair.
And is this an area of your campaign pledges that you will be focusing solely on?
It's sort of my campaign for MP, but it's not my only. It's not my only focus. I think that's what started me thinking about it. But I think it's actually everybody needs access. Everybody needs to be included. And I think, you know, I'd certainly like to see BSL included, British Sign Language included into the national curriculum, because lots and lots of children want to learn it, and that would help communication, break down communication barriers, and that immediately improves access. But I think it's all people.
From what we understand, you are the first deaf MP candidate for Lincoln. What determined you to run for the role?
Right. To be honest, I never sort of thought I want to be an MP. And in some ways, I'm still not thinking I want to be an MP, but I just feel I disagree with what's going on. I've been shadowing an MP. They've been selected for or there's somebody been selected to represent it, to be representative, and actually object to that person because they're going to be investigated. And I really objected to that, and I thought, well, why shouldn't I stand? And also that feeling of just because I'm deaf, why can't I? Why can't I? You know, I've been involved in the union and at work. I've been in the Houses of Parliament, and also because I want to see Lincoln improve and get a better quality of life for all people. You know, that includes transport, accessibility, benefits, you know, the new universal credit. So I'm not thinking, oh yeah, I want to be the first deaf sign language using MP. That's not really the issue. It's actually me as a person, I object to the person that's been picked, and I think I can represent people better.
And you mentioned some of the particular challenges that you've faced. What is the reality for people living with disability in Lincoln?
Right, I think accessibility is key. Also communication barriers. You know, we need to get rid of those. And I think if I had my utopia, if somebody said to me, which city do you want to be fully accessible? It'd be Lincoln. I want it here, I want it in my hometown. Because, you know, I often see stuff and, you know, you tell the council and say, sort this out. But, you know, everything seems to take a long, long time. You know, even the buses, how many of our elderly people can't even get on a bus? And you see it over years and years and it makes you angry. And what I want to do is channel that anger and say, you know, come on, let's get on with this. Let's make a difference. you know, companies, employers, you know, we need to look after our communities. It's not just, you know, disabled people or elderly people. What about mums with pushchairs? What about people that are coming as tourists? How do they communicate when they're out and about? You know, it should be something, it's our city. It should be for all of us.
And so how do you aim to challenge those things that I presume that you put down to the Conservative government who have been in power over the last 7 years or so? What are you going to do to change these challenges?
I think if I became MP, I'd want to get involved in different groups in Parliament. So, you know, talking to the Ministry of Transport, you know, the DWP, there's lots of issues there. And I think what you need is evidence of real people, not just government statistics. You know, they need to listen to the real people, the voters, their concerns, their ideas, their problems, and feed it back. That's how it needs to change. Government should be for us. You know, and if you think of a future, you know, these people have voted for you, change their lives. You know, otherwise they're not going to vote for you again. I think it's to put us on the right path, really. You know, government should be for the people, by the people. They need to listen to the people. And I know a lot of different departments, like for education, you know, you can influence that to get BSL in the national curriculum. And the reason for that is that through my involvement for a lot of organisation and a lot of deaf organisations and the British Deaf Association, you know, if you put it onto the curriculum, a lot of those issues will break down. You know, I think if I work just by myself, you know, you can't achieve much by yourself. You have to work collaboratively, you have to work together to make an improvement for all.
Why should people put their faith in an independent candidate as opposed to well-established parties and national leaders? You know, as I said earlier, I've always voted Labour, but, you know, I think politics, it's the same with Conservatives and Liberals. You know, some bits are okay, some bits aren't okay, but they don't seem to talk to each other. They're always vying against each other. So in some ways, I feel it's better to be independent, but you could take the best bits of all of them. So I think if I said Labour and said vote for you, I'd only be taking on board the Labour manifesto. And there's lots of people that have objections to that. I think when you're independent, you can say, actually, we'll get the best. We'll get the best of all these proposals and all these manifestos. And that way we get the best for the people. And, you know, there's no party called the British Public Party. You know, and in some ways that's what we need, is listening to those people, everyday life, that lived experience. You know, parties don't seem to represent everybody. You know, they've all got their own little bit that they look after, and they don't look after the other people that don't fit into their party. And what I want to do is be a representative for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're Labour or Conservative or Lib Dem or whatever you are. If you live in Lincoln, I'll represent you. Now, from your comments slightly earlier on in the interview, you indicated that you have throughout your life sort of aligned yourself more with Labour. Critics might suggest now that the fact that you're standing might take votes away from other major parties such as Labour in Lincoln. What would you say to that?
Growing up, you know, like a lot of people, I think I knew nothing about politics except the colour, red and blue. I think it was only really a few years ago that I started to understand the nuances of the different politics. So I think really just in the last 10 years that I've learned more and more, and realising that, you know, you don't in lots of ways, you don't pick a party, you pick a candidate to represent your constituency, the place where you live, because that's going to make the difference to you. And I used to vote for somebody in Lincoln, not because she was a party, but because I believed in what she was saying and I felt she would represent me. And I hope that's what people will do for me.
Among other issues that people in the city are facing is a growing reliance on food banks. How would you tackle the issue of food poverty in the city?
I think through experience. The cuts in the benefits, that affects people. Whether you're a single mother, if you're on low income, and the delays within the system, that needs to be addressed with the DWP. There seems to be plenty of evidence out there that these cuts are really, really affecting people. And so they need to address it at a ministerial level. And also, you think about the food waste from some of the huge big supermarkets. Why can't it be recycled to people? There is plenty of food. Why isn't it shared out? So, talking to companies, the food waste that's chucked out of supermarkets is huge. And certainly, the DWP needs to review its cuts and how they implement those cuts and how they implement changes. So, for instance, if you've got DLA, Disability Living Allowance, now, you have to apply for PIP, Personally Independent Payment, and it's hugely complicated. And it seems to be that nobody's bothered about supporting people to claim this, to transition from one benefit to the other, and they're falling through the gaps. And people need that support. And it's kind of like, we've voted for you, we've paid our taxes, why aren't you doing something for us? People that have worked hard, paid tax, they then get a disability, which can happen to any of us, and then where's the support for them? That's not right.
Of course, this general election has been dubbed by many as the Brexit election. What is your stance on Brexit and how did you vote?
I voted to leave, and the reason I voted to leave is because I remember growing up, there were really strong British values, a strong British identity, I guess, and then we seemed to join the EU and we seem to be getting a lot of control from outside of our borders. Some stuff has been good, human rights has been good, but I feel really it's got out of control. There's too much money that's going out that's not publicly accountable. At the same time, we're paying out all this money to Europe. We're suffering horrendous cuts within local councils and local provision. And we need those services. So that's why I voted to leave, because I'm hoping that money will come back to local services. And I know that Brexit will affect people. But I think the fact that the majority of people in the UK voted to leave, it shows that what people want is trading, which is basically what the European vote was in the first place. It was for the common market. Yeah, we want trade, but we don't want to be controlled from outside of our borders. And particularly if you think what we spend out to the EU, and you think about the NHS and education, that's where our money should be going. And I'm really pleased that the exit vote won. I wasn't kind of expecting it. I think a number of people were surprised. And I'd like our British values back. We're a great trading nation, and we need to be doing that without that political intervention from outside of our borders.
Of course, voters' satisfaction with the end result of Brexit does depend on how negotiations go with the next government. Once we see signs of a new deal, would you agree to allow for a second referendum?
No. I think it should be accepted. The British people were given a choice and a vote, and they chose and they voted, and that's the end of the matter. The vote has been done, that's it. I know Scotland want a second vote, And I've got a lot of friends that live in Scotland and they talk about it and they go, no, you know, this is the point of a democracy. We had a vote and the country chose. You know, I don't think you can change your mind later on in the day. You know, obviously the trade negotiations need time, but no, the country's made a choice and that choice should be honoured.
Now we have time for just one more question. If we were to take a look at the polls today, we would see there are two front runners to becoming the next Prime Minister. Who would you prefer to see in that role, Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn?
To me, it doesn't matter what party it is. I think Theresa May. And I think because even though she wanted to vote in, when we voted, no, actually we want to go out, and she became Prime Minister, she has accepted that and she's doing her best to take us through that process and get us a good deal. And I admire her for that. And looking at cuts and how they affect people and disabled people and elderly people, you know, the newest thing that's just come up about taking into account their home in order to have home care. Personally, you can call me a bit old-fashioned, but I think really we're now in the 21st century and we should be looking forward, not looking back. And I know Labour in the past, you know, people say, oh, they've, you know, spent too much money and we've got into debt. So it almost like seems a cycle. Labour spend it, Conservatives cut it. We never seem to get out of debt. You know, I want that cycle to change. Whether that, you know, means that we've got to pay more tax. Sometimes if you want the services, you've got to pay for it. But I want that cycle to change of, you know, one lot cuts it and one lot spends it. That doesn't seem to help us.